Good morning, happy Monday, everybody. Apologies in advance, I've had a bit of a busy weekend, so I'm still feeling the consequences of it now. So if there's any point in this video where I suddenly stumble over my words, I just completely forget what I'm saying, it's totally self-inflicted and I don't deserve anyone's pity. So sort of reflecting on last week, I like to do this on the Monday because then I've got the weekend to sort of process my thoughts and sort of get myself together, normally anyway. So last week, I mentioned about social prescribing, and I was really fortunate that one of my tutors actually reached out to me and was like, if you fancy having a bit of a chat about that, it'd be brilliant to do that sort of thing. So I went and met them sort of earlier last week, and it was a really nice conversation to have because it just sort of solidified my thoughts around sort of OT input in sports and well-being sort of thing, certainly within a sports facility or a leisure facility type setting, in that she described it as having a bird's eye view of a facility when you're working not on a one-to-one basis. So obviously I've talked about making the facilities as accessible as possible. That's not to say that it's not currently accessible, but it's making people aware of how accessible it is and giving people that information. Also, sort of when I was looking at social prescribing, you've got what they call the link worker, who everyone sort of gets put in towards, and they will then sort of say, yes, you need to see this person, that person, or the other person. Now, in my head initially, I was like, oh, that sounds a bit like our role as occupational therapists. We are somebody who has a lot of knowledge about sort of what's out there, and we're problem solvers, so to speak. So we will redirect people on if that's something that's not in our skill base, whether that's physio, speech and language, all those sorts of areas. But my tutor actually corrected me on that front, because she'd had a conversation with somebody else who described a link worker as being like a travel agent. So yes, they have the knowledge of the people to refer it onto, but they do not have the same skill set that we do in regards to assessing an individual. So yeah, it's that whole sort of assessing that toolbox to sort of get to the bottom of what people's needs and wants are. So that was sort of the first part of my week, which was really, really interesting. I also had my sort of supervision / halfway report, because terrifyingly we are well past the halfway mark now. This is going so fast. And I had a really interesting conversation about the importance of movement. Now, that sounds really stupid at this stage, considering I'm in a sports and wellbeing facility. Now, it's probably very apparent that I am not somebody who is overly sporty in myself. I used to be years ago. I was quite the prolific swimmer, and I used to love cycling and all this sort of thing. But I've had my own health issues with ankles and knees and all that sort of thing. The parts of you that you really need to move. And I self-admit that I've got into a bubble of being fearful of movement for fear of damaging my joints even more. And what I'm actually doing is probably worse, because certainly recently I've sustained an injury again to my knee by nothing exciting, and I've been diagnosed as developing arthritis. Now, that's unsurprising considering how much damage I've done to my joints over the years, but what I'm noticing is I am becoming so stiff and lacking in motivation, and it impacts you as a your mental well-being as well as your physical well-being. So there's certainly been days where I've been at home and I've not really done anything. I've pottered around the house, but that's been the extent of it. And then the next day I feel really awful for it. My mood can drop so rapidly. So having that conversation around the importance of it, it's not a revelation as such, but it's always good to have somebody to remind you, to give you a bit of a poke, I suppose, is what I'm getting at. So yeah, and sort of following that conversation, we had a bit of a talk about sort of what restrictions there are to the placement I'm currently on. And that's not to say that the team and everything are wonderful, but because this is a facility on an educational site, it's students and for staff of that educational facility. It's the summer holidays, so by the natural way of things, there are not the same number of people coming through the doors, and certainly not the target group that I am aiming at, really. So, you know, it's like on Friday, I think in the whole of the day there was 30 people or less who came to use the facilities, which for somewhere as big as this is quite dramatic, really. So by that extent, when we were talking about my report, I was saying, you know, there are certain sets of skills that I know I have, and that sounds really egotistical, but I've always prided myself on communication first and foremost. So you can probably tell I like talking, but I also like to listen. I like that social engagement. I like to build a rapport with people, and because of that, I've not really had that aspect of that in this placement. So there's areas that were marked on in our reports that I just don't feel I'm meeting, because there are just naturally limitations there at the moment. So we had a bit of a conversation around that and how that actually works. And, you know, I've discussed the fact that obviously there are other ways that I've communicated. Obviously there is a staff team at large. I have reached out to other groups. I've done a multitude of other things that demonstrate good communication skills, but they're all limited within a certain area, so to speak. Like they've all been emails or video calls or stuff like that. It's all digital platform. It's not face-to-face interaction. So we had a bit of a chat around that as well. And we're saying about face-to-face and digital meetings. I had 2 digital meetings with other students who are from other universities, who are on similar placements to myself. One in particular has a placement at the sports facility. It's his educational establishment. And it was really interesting to hear some of the similar, not problems, but, you know, there were barriers that we've both faced, and certainly in regards to environmental assessments and whatnot, there not being a sort of format to follow, so to speak. So we've both created our own format to follow. So we shared some notes on that, which was really interesting. I got the mickey taken out of me relentlessly because I am terrible. I love a table. And that's a shout out to Gareth as well. If Gareth is watching, he is one of my colleagues who also loves a table. So, you know, we had very different approaches to how we went about doing that. So mine was very much, I found a lot of documentation to build my form around, sort of thing, which in some respects highlights my lacking in confidence just to produce a format and be like, yes, that is what it is, and I know that's the appropriate stuff to put in there. Whereas this other student, he still referred to documents, but not to the same extent that I did. He very much trusted his own intuition, and created this document for himself, and both work equally as well as each other, but it was just interesting to see that different way of working. So for this week is get the accessibility videos for the gym done and dusted, really. I've got really hung up on this My Wellness app and getting how-to documents produced for those, and they've taken up a lot more time than they were intended to. So I'm a little bit behind schedule. My schedule, personal schedule. Obviously, I'm self-directing on this placement. So at the moment they are pretty much done. I just need to record the audio for those, but I really need to pull my finger out, and the videos that I want to produce for the facility is to demonstrate the equipment upstairs, how it's adaptable, accessible, and what benefits they will have for people. So that's this week's target. Fingers crossed we get there in the end. All right, thanks very much, guys. Bye for now.